The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending our cell tower tracking webinar. I'm Nathan Swaim, the president of ANRC, and one of our goals this year was to increase our public awareness into all the research we've been doing in the cybersecurity arena. So next month, we'll be also hosting a malware webinar showing best practices in reverse engineering and the latest and greatest malware threats that are out there today. So I say that so that if you'd like to be part of our webinar mailing list, let us know and we'll get you added to the list. We plan to start doing at least 1 to 2 of these per month in different areas of expertise. So our goal this webinar is about cell tower tracking and how it's an underutilized evidential source for mobile investigations. Our target audience is mobile forensics analysts and forensics examiners. So if you're one of those, then you're in the right place. And if you're not, it's still okay because we have some great information and some good entertainment ahead. So you'll still enjoy the webinar. So before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our company and what we do here. ANRC is an advanced cybersecurity training, consulting, and solutions provider. We offer about 40 cybersecurity training courses that are currently used by the U.S. government as pipeline training to train cyber analysts. And we offer cyber threat assessments and consultations for Fortune 1000 and 500 companies where we do an intense security assessment to identify areas of concern. And finally, we do products and solutions, one of which was showcased at DEF CON 2 years ago. So we try to stay on the cutting edge of the cybersecurity realm. In particular, our speaker today is Martin Griffiths, and Martin is the lead mobile forensics examiner in the UK. His company is called Forensic Analytics, and they've developed some really cool tools to aid in court cases and investigations, some of which has changed the tides in some really high-profile cases in the United Kingdom. So you'll be hearing more about that from Martin. So I think you'll be really interested to hear his experiences and what they've developed to kind of help forensics examiners. And I know for sure you'll be entertained by his war stories and high-profile cases that he's worked on where the cell tower tracking made a huge difference in the forensics impact as well. Additionally, they just released a book called Cell Tower Tracking, and they'll give you some more information on that book. It's available through Amazon. It came out recently and sold out very quickly, so the publisher's been working aggressively to get caught up with the demand. So you should definitely check out that book as well if this is an area that interests you. And finally, just some general guidelines on the webinar. So I'll be monitoring the chat window since we can't hear you in the audience. So if you have any questions, there's a question box there. Just send them across and I'll do what I can to answer those. If I can't answer them, I'll kind of pool them up and then pass them off to Martin at key points in our webinar. So if we don't get to some of your questions, then go ahead and ask them. Rest assured, we will answer them via email after the webinar, and we're recording this webinar as well. So you'll be able to download the webinar, the slides, and we'll follow up with any questions that didn't get answered from you. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Martin and let him get started. Go ahead and take it away, Martin.
Fantastic. Okay, so thank you for that excellent introduction, Nathan. I'd just like to wish everybody good morning over there, good afternoon over here in Europe. And what we're going to do is take up about 55 minutes of your time to give you a European perspective on what we call over here cell site analysis. And cell site analysis certainly in Europe is now a mainstream evidential source that is used in an awful lot of cases today, because fundamentally, most people are walking around with mobile devices, be that their tablet, be that their handset, whatever it happens to be. So there's a lot of evidence to be gathered in and around the usage of mobile devices, and specifically one of the areas that I want to be talking about today is an area that traditionally in the US is not routinely undertaken as part of a cell tower tracking or cell site analysis investigation, which is the use of forensic radio surveys. I've I've attended court a lot to present for both prosecution and defence, but predominantly prosecution in relation to a lot of cell site investigations, and I don't draw any conclusion at all without considering the network readings that have been undertaken. So I would regard forensic radio surveys to be fundamental to any cell site analysis or cell tower tracking investigation. More of that a little bit later. I'll be defining them for you, and I'll be giving you some examples, some war stories, if you will, as to where undertaking forensic radio surveys actually made the difference. So let me introduce myself to you. Yeah, my name's Martin Griffiths. I've been in engineering, telecom engineering, since about 1984 when I first joined the Royal Air Force. That was radio engineering, really. Since that time, I've been working in the industry, all the way up to Chief Technology Officer. So some reasonably high-profile positions that I've had within the industry for about the last 6 or 7 years. Probably 8 years if I care to work it out. I've also been an expert witness in which I have delivered evidence in hundreds of cases, really. Amongst other things that I've done, I am the author of the agreed technical facts into the voicemail hacking against newsgroup newspapers and Glenmore Care, which is a very, very high-profile story within the UK, and I'm sure I made it to the US as well. Okay, so let me get on with the presentation. So what we're going to be looking at then is what cell site analysis actually is, and how it works. Certainly, how it works within the UK.
Hey, Martin, I don't think
yes.
we can see your slides. It looks like it's frozen. Do you still have it showing?
Okay, yeah. Let me try playing that. How are we doing? How's that?
Yeah, now we can see it.
Okay, perfect. You've not missed anything of significance, incidentally, people, so my apologies for that. Okay, so we start off with the agenda then. So, what is cell site analysis? How does it work? Certainly, how does it work within Europe? The differences between what we regard as cell site and cell tower as it's defined in the US. We'll look at some case studies, some war stories, as I've indicated. And when it says handling the exceptions, that's something that a forensic radio survey can actually create for you. It can give you what those exceptions are, and what I mean by that I will cover when we look at some of these slides as we go through. Then there'll be a summary and a wrap, but of course, the lines of communication are always open. Certainly from the last webinar that we ran about a month ago, there's some contacts that I've made as a result of that, and we've had some really good interactions. So if you are interested in this area and you would wish to communicate beyond the webinar, then please, I'd welcome any input that you have, and I'll answer any of your questions. So that's an open door for you. Okay, so let me move on then, and we're going to start off then by looking at what is cell site analysis. Well, really, what does it try to do? I'm just going to go back. There's a little bit of text I wanted you to see. Cell site analysis, yeah, it attempts to provide evidence of where a mobile phone or mobile device may have been when certain calls were made. So that's the first thing to say, is that what we're measuring is we're measuring the call activity of a device. Now, when we talk about call activity, that could include anything from voice calls, from text messages, from GPRS sessions, in other words, data sessions, access to the internet, access to social networking, that kind of thing, and also sending and receiving of picture messages, MMS traffic. So in other words, where a handset has been used, a footprint is left within the billing data, and what we are essentially trying to do with cell site analysis is to get access to that billing data, to analyze that billing data, and through combining that with forensic radio surveys, trying to come up with conclusions in relation to the likely whereabouts of target devices, target handsets at key times. And what we can do through undertaking RF surveys at key locations, we can therefore come up with conclusions in relation to the likelihood of a handset being located, and this is as close as you can get to with this cell site analysis, at or in the vicinity of a key location. Now that's an interesting term, one that's often challenged in court. At or in the vicinity, what does it mean? Well, what at or in the vicinity means is really, it means that were I to have a handset and were I to make a call or send a text or access the web from a given location, what I'm identifying is a cell that would be handling that call. That means that I could have been at that location when that transaction was undertaken. Now, it's also true to say that I could be at other locations. In other words, I'm somewhere within what I would describe as the dominant coverage footprint of a given cell. So there is a degree of inexactness to the conclusions that you can draw within cell site, but that does not make it poor evidence. It's often what is described as supportive evidence, or supporting evidence, should I say. So not primary evidence. So therefore, cell site on its own, arguably, should be insufficient to gain a conviction. Having said that, I've been involved in a number of investigations and presentations at court where the cell site is the strongest evidence we have, and yet we have still got a conviction out of it. So that is by no means a certainty that it would only ever be used as supporting evidence, but that is best practice. Okay, so if we look at the structure of a cellular network, then a cellular network, not surprisingly, is formed from hundreds or thousands, of overlapping radio cells. Now we're drawing these cells in this particular diagram as circles, but of course in reality, when we look at a given physical mast, in other words, a pole in the ground, well then a cell is a sector of that circle. So typically that sector would be 120 degrees, and hence you would need 3 cells to make up a full 360-degree circle coverage. So generally speaking, the cells certainly that we find within Europe are sectorized cells, and hence each cell generally points over a given geographical area. The direction over which it points is something that we call the azimuth, and often that azimuth data is found within the raw cellular billing data that we need to access when we're actually creating evidential reports. Knowing what the azimuth is very, very useful because it gives you a very general indication of the direction over which a radio signal is propagating. Each cell on this particular slide has got a unique identity. So we take the one at the bottom there, it's got a cell ID of 12347. Now that cell identity is only a small part of the full postal address, if you will, of that particular cell. So the cell IDs have got a structure. The cell ID is the very end part of that structure, and that cell ID is unique, or certainly should be unique on the planet. It doesn't have to be, but it should be. Okay, so if we get access then to what I would describe as raw billing data in relation to a subject handset within a given time frame on a certain date or group of dates, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the times, dates, durations of transactions undertaken, and critically I'm looking for the cell IDs as well. There's a great variance in the in Europe in relation to the structure and the format of the billing data that we get from the cellular service providers. Some of the providers provide data that is very, very simple and easy to read. Some of them provide data which is frankly impenetrable. And of course I'm talking about Vodafone there. And so what that has meant is that really the whole area of cell site analysis requires some specialist skills, some expertise to understand this black art, which is really to understand the structure and the nature of the cellular billing data across a broad range of service providers. And that really is one of the impediments to allowing cell site analysis to really get into the hands of frontline officers, frontline investigators, because we need this level of technical expertise to actually understand and interpret this billing data, because it is so esoteric. I think Nathan mentioned at the start that I, along with my colleague Joe Hoy, are involved in a business which we started within the UK, in which we're trying to change all that, because we've got a tool which will take billing data in from any service provider, and it'll analyze it, it will cleanse it, and it will make it accessible to people who are non-technical, people that don't have a cellular background or don't have to understand exactly how to interpret this inaccessible data. So it's been very well received in the UK so far. Okay, let me move on, if I may. So we have a mobile device, we have a cell which is sitting on a mast. The cell is a unique ID. When calls are made, successful calls are made, well, then that data is actually recorded, and that data is recorded by a mobile service provider, and that data has to be accurate. In the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in the US as well, when we're talking about data where any kind of financial transaction is concerned, that data has to be accurate. And so within the UK, a mobile service provider is legally obliged to ensure the accuracy of their call billing data. In other words, it's evidential. So if it's accurate, I can rely on it. And if I can rely on it, well, then I can use it as part of my evidence. So these call detail records are in effect a record of successful transactions, billing records, in other words. Now, let me just talk about what makes a successful billing record. Provided an end-to-end connection has actually been secured between a source and destination device, or between a source device and the voicemail platform, provided that connection is made, a billing record is created. And so therefore what that means is that a billing record may be created for something less than a second. It's still valid, it's still happened, it's still recorded, and I can still use it, because when you get a long string of calls where you do get, for example, calls going into voicemail, and they may only be 1 or 2 seconds long, because people tend to know if they're calling voicemail, there tends to be a discernible gap. And you know in that instant, in that discernible gap, whether you're actually going to leave a message or not. And if you decide you're not, you may even hang up before the voice starts, saying, "Hey, please leave a message after the tone," you know, in the James Garner style. But you know, before it gets to that point, if you hang up, if that connection has been made, even before you hear the voice, it's a successful billing transaction. So having lots of records that are really, really short are great, because it gives a position in time. It gives a point in time, a moment in time, if you will, that you can map. It's very, very useful. So as I've already indicated, you know, cell site analysis techniques employed to determine whether mobile handset may have been. I'll cover more of that when we look at some of the war stories a little bit later. So in this particular example then, if we look at the billing record for this particular handset, we can see that a call was made using a cell ID, which is 12347. Okay, that means that at the time that call was undertaken, that handset must have been somewhere within the coverage of that cell ID 12347. Now, if we knew or had an indication of what the coverage of cell 12347 was, well then, if we have also an understanding about the case, for example, key locations, well, if we can marry the two up, well then there's a possibility the handset may have been at that key location at that time. I don't know that that's the case, but what I could do is I could prove the theory, and I could actually go out to that key location. I could undertake some forensic radio surveys, what I call spot readings. that would tell me whether the cell 12347 was providing dominant coverage at that area. In other words, whether it is a cell that is likely to handle my call were I to make one from that location. The other thing to say about this is if we're looking at durations of calls that tend to be quite a long time, in the order of multiple minutes, even up to 20 minutes, well then what cell site will tell you is it will tell you where the handset was at the start of the call. It will tell you where the handset was at the end of the call. But what it may not tell you is where the handset was in the middle part of the call. So for example, if the handset that we see on this particular cell was involved in a 20-minute call, I don't know whether that handset had actually drifted over and handed over to the cell to the left-hand side and then drifted back again throughout the duration of that call, or whether it had been in one place. I just don't know because the billing data doesn't tell me that. So I'm just identifying some of the foibles or considerations or shortcomings, if you will, of cell site analysis. So if we have a look then at a scenario, we have an incident location denoted by the red dot. We've got this cell ID 12347, and because we have this incident location, I've gone out and I've undertaken some forensic radio surveys. So what that essentially means then is I've got a device that may look very, very much like a Nokia handset, for example, or could look a little more complex than that. However, what it is a device that's got some monitoring software on it. And what it's able to do is it's able to measure what the serving cell or cells were at that particular location. And therefore, I can analyze that data, which will give me an indication of what the serving cell is and what the neighboring cells happen to be as well. Now, when I say serving cell or serving cells, there's a very good reason I say that. You can think of a radio signal as a little bit like a breeze. In other words, it's got some variability to it. It's in a state of flux. And just as you have a breeze ebbing and gusting, well, so a radio signal will do the same. And this is particularly prevalent when you get towards the outer edge of coverage of a cell. So if you look at the red dot on this particular slide and you move it an inch or so to the right, we're being the cross area, the crossover area between cells 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if you're in those crossover areas, we're in the outer coverage of a given cell. Well, that is where you can see this variability start to play out, because you may find that over the course of time that we're undertaking this network spot reading, at times cell ID 12347 is a serving cell, and at other times 23456 happens to be the serving cell. Now, when I talk about the length of time for doing this, as a general rule of thumb, if you were to go to a fixed location, well, then you should undertake measurements for a minimum period of about 5 minutes. Now, 5 minutes doesn't sound a particularly long period of time, but when you consider that a single second is a whole lifetime in communications terms, well, 5 minutes is actually several generations, and certainly it should be plenty of time to capture the ebbing and the gusting of that radio signal. Now, the key thing with doing that is if I was to find that more than one cell happened to be serving at a key location, well, when I then go to undertake my analysis of call billing data, if I find either of those two cells cropping up within that data, it means that the handset could have been at or in the vicinity of that key location at key times. And also, something else which is quite interesting is if we were to see two cells used at the start and the end of a call, and those two cells were found to be serving cells at a key location, well then usage of two different cells does not therefore indicate movement necessarily. So it's possible that you could be in one point at a time You could make a call, and simply because of the natural variation of radio signals, could you be attached to different cells for the duration of that call. Okay, so that is something known as a network spot survey, and I'll be covering the others as well very shortly. Okay, let me move on. Here's another type of survey, which is called a network coverage survey. And this really allows me to talk about examples where if you were simply to rely on mobile service provider coverage profiles and you didn't undertake your own radio surveys yourself in undertaking an investigation, well, you're going to be missing things. And here's a perfect example of the kind of things that you would miss. But before I talk about them, let me just describe the slide to you, if I may. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the a network coverage survey of a particular cell. We can see where that cell happens to be. There's the blue icon, which looks like a mast, just towards the upper right-hand side of this slide, surrounded by the red dots. And each of those red dots is an indication of where this particular cell was found to be providing dominant or serving coverage when a network survey or coverage survey has been undertaken. And what we see here is we can see the red dots and we can see the yellow dots. Now the yellow dots is an indication of where this particular survey was undertaken. So anywhere you see a dot is where network readings have actually been recorded. And so typically this would be something like a drive survey. So the yellow dots represent all of the roads that have been driven. And typically, you know, when a network coverage survey is undertaken, the distance covered by the survey is really a function of the strength of the desired cell that you're looking for. So if your cell started off just around where the dominant red dots are, as providing, you know, really strong signal there, #1 in the list, you know, once you're a little way away from this particular cell and this cell is now suddenly 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th in the list, and therefore there is no way this cell could provide serving coverage at that point, you've probably reached a point whereby you can stop doing the surveys, or this particular survey. Now the thing that I want to pick up with this particular diagram is what we see here is a cluster of red dots around that particular mast, which is probably what we'd expect. And that is probably what a service provider's coverage profile would come up with as well. And what you would miss, therefore, if you simply relied on a service provider's coverage profile, is all of the dots that you see in the bottom left-hand corner of this particular slide. There's a number of red dots in this corner. Now, I happen to know that this particular coverage profile was on a cell in a town called Bradford, which is in a county called Yorkshire, which is in northern England. They do absolutely fantastic curries. So if you get the chance to go to Bradford, you must have a curry. That's not the point of this slide. The point is this. The actual geographic area is a little bit like a bowl. And so what we see on the right-hand side of this particular slide, we see the mast, we see the coverage, and then what we see in the bottom left-hand corner there is the other side of the bowl that's been able to pick up this particular cell. Now, that may be by chance, that may be by design by the service provider. I don't know simply by looking at this, but what I can say is if I had a handset that had undertaken calls using that particular cell, and that handset was located in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, well, without a network coverage profile like this, I would say, well, that's impossible. That's not the case. Of course they couldn't have done, and therefore I've got evidence which is particularly unhelpful perhaps. But here, where I can see that actually this cell can provide coverage there, and furthermore it is quite feasible that handset could have been there. Now it could be critical. It could be that the bottom left hand corner of this map is where the incident occurred. And this cell could have been the cell that was used by a target or subject handset at a key time. So in the absence of this particular type of forensic radio survey, well then, you might miss evidence, you might miss key evidence that could be quite compelling to a jury. Now, I'm not suggesting that you undertake a network coverage profile for every case and for every cell used. Like anything, you would use good judgment and you would determine whether you felt there was a need to do it or not. But certainly, I've come up with I've come across a number of cases. I remember there was one in Wales whereby we had a defendant who lived in quite a long way from the incident location, and we'd undertaken a network coverage survey to the point whereby we felt that this cell couldn't serve anymore, and it wasn't up to the home location of this defendant, and so we were instructed to undertake the survey again, and this time make sure we covered the home location, which we did. And wouldn't you know it, there was a small spot of coverage which is almost right on top of the home location attributed to the defendant. So he was either very innocent or very lucky. We're not entirely sure which, but it was only through undertaking a forensic radio survey that would come out. Otherwise, it just would never have come out. Okay, so let's think about these survey types then. We have location surveys, or spot readings as I've called them. That is where we undertake readings across networks for a period typically of 5 minutes. We have cell coverage surveys, and with the cell coverage surveys we've just seen, we would drive, walk or cycle or run or swim or do whatever is necessary to actually find out what the coverage footprint of a given cell looks like. I tend to find that cell coverage surveys tend to be undertaken more by the defence than they are by the prosecution. And the reason for that is if the prosecution is trying to identify a handset as being at a given location, well then it probably makes sense to find out what the area of tolerance within that might be. And by understanding the coverage of a given cell, well that can give alternative addresses, it could give alternative explanations, alibis typically. And then we have route and scenario surveys. So again, if we're trying to look for patterns of travel and we're trying to prove that a vehicle or a bike actually traveled a particular route, well then typically what we'll do is we'll drive the route in both directions and we'll see what the route throws up. We'll see what kind of cells were found to be serving. I undertook an investigation recently. It resulted in several convictions, which was it was a kidnap, and a number of the I'm going to be postponing that. I might do for at least 4 hours. Postpone. My apologies for that. There we go. And on this particular kidnap, a number of the defendants all travelled to a major town in the UK to pick up some ransom cash, and even though we had different networks used by the different handsets, there's a very clear pattern of travel for all of the handsets, and that was also proven by a drive survey as well. So very, very useful to do. Now, the other thing which is really considered to be best practice, but does come, at a price, is to undertake regular and proactive surveying of crime hotspots. Now, the reason for that is that a cellular network is in a constant state of change. Right now within the UK, what we've got is service providers that are actually combining their networks, and it's likely that we're going to be dealing with, in a couple of years' time, I would say, only 3 networks. Right now we've got 5. So those networks are coming together. One of the reasons for that is that the cost of deploying a radio access network is really, really expensive. So if you can share that with a competitor or indeed combine forces, well then, economically it makes really good sense. Now, and on the basis, therefore, that the network of cells are in a constant state of change, well then regular and proactive surveying, what I would call network audits of crime hotspots, means that you constantly have an updated database of which cells on which networks are serving key areas at which time and date. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to tell you why when we look at the next point, actually, which is historical database of old surveys. I recently gave evidence at a murder case in London for the Metropolitan Police, in which we couldn't actually undertake any network radio surveys, any forensic surveys at all, because all of the cells in this investigation, because it is about 5 years old, all of the cells were no longer in operation. So what we had to do is we had to go into an historical database of old surveys. So in other words, surveys and cases that were ongoing at around the time that this incident occurred. And we had to piece together the cell site report for multiple other cases and multiple other network coverage surveys, which sounds like an evidential nightmare. But it stood up to cross-examination, and we got the conviction. So we wouldn't have been able to do that was that data not available to us. So it is quite important. If surveys are not undertaken, then you will just never know. And as I say, I'm going to keep coming back to this. Only if network surveys have been undertaken can I stand up in court and talk about a handset being at or in the vicinity of a key location. In the absence of network radio surveys, I really haven't got the confidence to say that. So in terms of best practice then with cell site analysis, yes, it's supporting evidence. I've mentioned that already. It fits beautifully alongside automatic number plate recognition, camera data, CCTV data, provided you can align the times, that kind of thing. Cell site or cell tower alone, generally insufficiently robust to be considered primary evidence, but sometimes if that's all you got, well then that's down, certainly in the UK, to the Crown Prosecution Service in terms of whether that is enough. Cell site is an inexact science, and the jury does need to understand the vagaries, really, the fact that it is this inexact science, the fact that we cannot pinpoint a handset, the fact that there are variations in radio coverage, the fact that cells can change, but that doesn't mean that it's not good evidence, because it is. And I continue to get in the box and present cell site evidence, and yeah, provided it's explained simply and clearly with animated maps, generally speaking, the jury are pretty cute and they get it. The other thing we would say is that voice and text billing is preferred over data billing. Now, the reason for this is because with data billing there are certain foibles. In other words, generally speaking, it cannot always be considered in every circumstance to be exact. So for example, if I was looking at a billing record, and sometimes session lengths of billing records could be measured in multiple hours. If you look at the timestamp for the start of that particular session, that would have been accurate 6 hours ago. But 6 hours down the line, that cell ID may not have changed in the billing data, even though in reality a handset may well have moved around within a geographical area. I'm not going to say any more about it than that, because I just don't have time in this short and punchy webinar. But if you do want to know more about that, I'll very, very happily share that with you. So generally speaking, voice and text messaging, it is that data that gives you a moment in time. It is that data that is accurate at the time it is recorded, and therefore it is that data that I have to say is extremely reliable. Okay, so let's just very briefly consider some of the components then of cell site analysis. So we've got inputs, we've got outputs. So we've got the call billing records, critical. Increasingly, what we're seeing is such things as Wi-Fi data also being incorporated by cellular service providers that offer Wi-Fi as well. I see more of that down the line. Cell addresses, well, some billing records contain cell addresses, others do not. If they do not, you have to request them separately. And we also need an understanding of the case in terms of events and locations that are key. We need to understand the attribution of handsets to which defendants. We need to understand what the allegation is. So what are we trying to prove or disprove? Once we understand that, through undertaking cell site or cell tower tracking analysis, we create a number of outputs. One of them is the forensic radio survey. The forensic radio survey, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a coverage, a route profile, or indeed spot readings, gives me information about the network that I wouldn't otherwise know. And it is knowing what that tells me that gives me confidence in drawing conclusions. We have a report. And really what we're doing with the report is we're tying together the billing data, the forensic radio surveys, and aligning that with the allegations and the events and locations, really, to see whether what we're trying to prove with the cell site analysis actually stacks up to rational scrutiny. We have the call tables, and the call tables are often combined, so that means that we can have the billing records for multiple handsets, all color coded so that visually it's appealing and we can see the order of events as well. And then we have the maps, and where we have the maps, what we're trying to do, of course, is we're trying to place handsets on maps, and we can do that by identifying where particular cells are. Every cell's got either lat and long or eastings and northings, so we can uniquely identify it on a map. And also, if we have the cell addresses, then we will have the azimuth. So we can put little arms on cells to give an indication of where the cell is likely to be pointing. Okay, so differences then. So what are the differences between Europe and the US? Well, the answer to that is technological, architectural, and procedural. So let's briefly touch on some of that. Certainly, technological differences. Certainly from a cellular point of view, the US has traditionally always gone their own way with cellular technologies. So in Europe, we produced GSM and we had UMTS. Well, in the US, we had CDMA1, we had TDMA, then there was CDMA 2000 and UMTS as well. In other words, it was much more of a complex picture, more technologies. And this is really what the slide here reflects. Having said that, it would seem to me that certainly there's a move towards LTE, and so I think probably in a few years, I would suspect, but it looks as though there's a move within the US towards LTE technology. So what you will see over time is it is likely that a number of these technologies will fade out, but they could still be around a few years yet. There's been a lot of investment, certainly in Europe, in the 3G or UMTS infrastructure as well as the GSM, and you know what? They work. And as they work, and as the equipment is there, service providers want to sweat the assets. So it's often commercial considerations alongside the technical ones that determine the refresh of technologies. Okay. Architectural differences. If we look at the map on the right-hand side of the United Kingdom, as you can see, everything is coloured. The whole thing has been coloured in. In reality, that is not my experience. I do get regular dropouts when travelling around, but suffice it to say that the objective in and around European networks is 95+% coverage, and it's really defined in terms of by population and also by coverage as well. Geographically. In the US, however, it does tend to be different. It tends to be by conurbation. So what we see here is a number of networks: T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint, and Verizon. I think this is probably from Verizon's website because that is the map which has got the most colour on it. But suffice it to say, if you've got two conurbations linked by hundreds of miles of arid desert, well, then it doesn't make sense to provide coverage on any other part but the main trunk route between those two heavily populated areas. So it's a very different architectural look and feel within the US. in terms of how that affects cell site analysis, well, I think it's probably unlikely you're going to be doing cell site analysis that does involve travel across the whole country. Of course, I can't rule that out, but certainly in the investigations I get involved in, rarely do I see the whole of the UK covered. You know, there's a few key towns or even an area of a town. So the important thing is that we know which network is being used, and we can get access to the billing data. Another key consideration here is the process and procedures. We have something called RIPA in place. It stands for the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is driven by the UK Parliament, which defines very, very clearly which communications data is accessible by whom and how, and it also defines for how long a cellular service provider has to maintain and retain accurate billing data, which is right now for about a year. So you can guarantee you're going to get data that's a year old. Beyond that, it becomes a little bit borderline. Slightly different in the US, and there's different levels of access to billing data and different levels of content that you can find within the billing data. So the more data you need, in other words, the more detail you need, certainly if you want the cell site data, certainly it becomes a rule of law called, what is it? Probabilities in the title. I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest with you. But suffice it to say, it's a higher level of requirement, and you would need an affidavit to get it. You can also get access to what is known as ranging data as well, which is an indication of where a handset was in relation to a cell when a call was undertaken. So there are some differences and also some similarities between the process of getting access to US data, but I would expect you guys probably to be a little closer than that than I am right now, to be honest. So for that reason alone, I'm keen to move on and look at some of the case studies. In terms of some of the case studies, what we're going to look at here is the effect that cell site analysis has had on some of the European cases. So let me do that. So as a rule of thumb, a term I've used quite a lot, reliance upon cellular service providers output is fine in many cases and is sufficient and is enough. However, occasionally, and when I say occasionally, it's actually quite frequently, you get exceptions that require further analysis and further forensic investigation. So there's a few case studies that we're going to look at right now that highlight this. The fact is, as I've mentioned, a radio environment is dynamic. It is in a constant state of flux, and these can be critical factors. You know, so for example, if you're dealing with a CDMA 2000 network or a 3G network, you know, you've got something called cell breathing going on. And what that means is that the coverage of a given cell is a factor of how busy the cell is. And the cell is going to be busier in the busy hour. And so if you're looking at an event that occurred at 5 o'clock in the morning, well, then it's unlikely that that cell is going to be busy. And so the coverage of that cell is going to be greater than if you were considering an event that happened at 9 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. Because the cell is likely to be experiencing this thing called cell breathing, which can be certainly, you know, up to 10% of the coverage area of a given cell. So some of those things, you know, you may need to factor in. So cell site evidence is always created in context and in context of the times, dates, environments that you're dealing with. Having said that, a cellular network is very well engineered, and every cell has got a defined footprint that it should cover, and that defined footprint is actually designed around a certain level of congestion anyway. So you should never be in a position within a cellular network, theoretically at least, where congestion within a network is creating holes within the network. So you should always have that coverage. And as I've mentioned, you know, yes, the radio environment is dynamic, but if I was in the center of the beam from a cell and I was to go and take network readings at that location in the center of the beam of a cell any day of the week, any month of the year, any time of the day, I would find that that cell is likely to be providing serving coverage at all times. It's only when you get to the edge of the cell that this becomes more prevalent, but you need to have an awareness of it nonetheless. Okay, so let's go on to consider the case studies then. So case one is a case that's actually undertaken by a colleague of mine, Joe, actually. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at central London. Now, central London is a hideously dense urban environment, very, very dense urban environment, and the average coverage of a cell is half a kilometre currently within the UK. So roughly every half a kilometre you can find another cell. So in this particular investigation then, which was a stabbing that occurred within a nightclub, the suspect's handset made a call 2 minutes before this particular stabbing, and the cell that was used was the Science Museum cell. Now, the Science Museum, fantastic museum if you ever come to London. It's wonderful. My children love it. But the most important thing about it right now is it's got a cell mast on top of it, and that cell mast is 5 miles away. Now, in London terms, that's huge. That's massive. In fact, it's almost unthinkable that a cell on the top of the Science Museum should be able to provide serving coverage at a nightclub all the way over in, is that Shoreditch? Streatham, sorry. All the way over in South London, in Streatham. And so on that basis alone, the cell site or cell tower evidence is starting to look a little bit dodgy. It's starting to look a little bit unreliable. And certainly the defence would be all over this. And if you simply were to go to a cellular service provider and say, give me the coverage footprint of the Science Museum cell, I can promise you this, it would not cover all the way to the nightclub. And so on that basis, you would have to say, well, I can't explain why the handset was there and this cell was used. Well, the handset couldn't have been in the nightclub is the only conclusion you could naturally draw in the absence of a forensic radio survey. So in this particular case, the defence were pressing for the phone evidence to be excluded as unreliable because of this apparent impossible call. However, a radio survey found that actually at the top of the nightclub there's a Velux window through which the cell on top of the Science Museum was serving. So it's just a very, very small area of this nightclub was served by this Science Museum cell. Now, of course, being able to get that critical forensic evidence meant that this call could be explained. It therefore meant that the evidence was viable, and ultimately it meant that a conviction was resulted. Okay, next one, quite a famous case, a Soham murder case. A guy called Huntley. He murdered 2 schoolgirls, Jessica and Holly. It's all over the news in the UK. People still talk about it today. Everybody knows who Huntley is. So a little village called Soham, which is in Cambridgeshire, was served by a cell which served the village of Soham. However, in this particular investigation, an analysis of one of the girls' handsets, Jessica's handset, showed that when the handset was switched off, the handset actually was attached to another cell called Burwell East. Now, Burwell East was the cell that was serving the adjacent village and actually sent the investigation over to around the area of Burwell East for about 2 weeks, trying to find these missing girls, trying to investigate how this had happened. And interestingly, this guy Huntley even was interviewed on TV and took part in the search in and around the Burwell East area. So then they undertook a forensic radio coverage survey of the Burwell East cell site, and I don't know if you can see that there's a hashed area just above where it says Soham on the map. Now, there's a hashed area. There's actually several little hashed areas that you can't really see on this diagram where it says so on. But actually over Huntley's house, there was a hashed area. And actually, we could therefore prove that the Burwell East cell site provided serving coverage at Huntley's house, and therefore it provided evidence of where the girls may have been. There was a very, very strong suspicion at this point anyway that the girls had ended up at this guy's house, but this critical forensic evidence was necessary in order to put all the pieces together. Okay, so that's another example. And the other case we got here is one that I was involved in, actually. Again, this is a London case. And what was interesting about this is we have an incident location, which is a flag there where somebody was pinned against a wall and fatally stabbed, sadly. Now, we have the coverage of one of the cells that was used very shortly before the incident occurred. Now, what we knew is that we knew that this cell had been used, and we knew that the suspects were in a car, and we knew that there was a call which had handed over from this particular cell to this particular cell. Now, I'm not sure whether you can align the two here, but we're looking at an adjacent cell here, and what you can see is you can still see that flag, hopefully, the little red flag sticking up just just to the southwest of where it says London. If you come down about 2 inches, you can see the flag. So that kind of aligns the two diagrams. Now, because we had the network coverage survey of both of those cells, and we knew that the call handed over from the blue cell to the pink cell, well then we knew that it had actually localized where the car could have been, because there was only two areas where a car could have been. One of them was on the road leading up to the murder location, and the other one was on a road above the murder location. But again, another example of where forensic coverage survey in this case localized where a car could have been, and therefore allowed one or two conclusions to be drawn. And there we go. You can see the areas where the car had to have been. One of them, as I say, leading up to that particular location. So summary and wrap, we're just about there. So biggest challenge to cell site. Biggest challenge is the fact that it's described as an inexact science, which can often be exploited by the defense. But if you have network readings that have been undertaken, they tell you exactly what is out there, and on the basis of that you can draw conclusions. Overview of CSAS. CSAS, Cell Site Analysis Suite, is a software that Forensic Analytics have developed to automate a lot of the cell site analysis that we do within the UK. Certainly a police analyst will spend an inordinate amount of time processing and cleansing billing data. Well, you know, we can reduce that from hours and hours and days to, frankly, seconds. And once the data is cleansed, well, then we can analyze it. So there's a lot of nice little visualizations that you can do to look at such things as first call, last call analysis. If you want to find out where someone lives or someone stays overnight, we can look at collocation. So if you can see clean and dirty handsets, that kind of thing. It's a brilliant tool. I would encourage you to do a quick search on the web of CSAS and take a look on the website. Further investigation, well, we will be doing more training in relation to cell site analysis, and we hope to be delivering some courses later in this year, working with Nathan within the US. And if any of you have liked what you've heard today, well then, do get on the mailing list and look out for those. We do have a full portfolio of courses. Biggest challenge really is the billing records, as I've mentioned. CSAS, little bit on it. It really ties together the RF readings that you might take, certainly that we take over here, the CDR records, and also allows you to do a lot of analysis and produce court ready tables. So that's a little bit about CSAS. And in terms of further reading, well, you'll notice that there's a book here, Forensic Radio Survey Techniques for Cell Site Analysis, published by Wiley. Again, available on Amazon. Yeah, get them while they're hot, because they're going like hotcakes at the moment, which is a good thing, because it's a very interesting area. And if you ask for a personal view, I think that the US is possibly missing a trick by not undertaking forensic radio surveys. One of the impediments to it is the cost of equipment. Well, the cost of equipment is somewhere between £5,000 to £25,000, depending upon what you want, which is not a huge amount of money when you compare it against the cost of losing a case. But that is a particularly biased view, which I make no apologies for. Okay, in terms of training, lots of training that we do, covering everything from basic cell site analysis to cell site analysis around LTE and the 4G technologies. Talk to Nathan if you want to know more about that. But beyond that, unless you've got any questions, I'd like to say thank you very, very much for listening to me today. I've earned a cup of tea now. If you've got any questions, please ask away.
Very good.
And I'll hand over to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Martin. That was excellent information. We hope you guys got a lot of good information out of this and found the information useful. We thank you for attending our webinar today. So once again, we'll email you out the links for the slides and the recorded broadcast that you can download, and you'll have a real short 3-question survey when we close out here that we'd appreciate you filling out so we can improve in the future. So thanks for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and let us know if we can help you in the future. Take care.